Okay, today I just want to go over a few quick reminders about how to use these cameras. When you get your camera, it's going to come in a package like this, and inside you are going to have microphone cable extender, camera, and preamplifier. And your preamplifier should already be connected to your camera. Okay, so let's go ahead and flip on our cameras here. And when you receive your camera, it will be set so that it takes care of exposure for you. The way that it does this is we choose a shutter speed, 1/50th of a second. This is going to give us the best looking motion blur. It's going to be cinematic looking. It's going to look realistic to our eyes. So we're always going to use 1/50th of a second. Your camera then knows that that's not going to change, and then it tries to figure out the correct ISO and aperture for you. So ISO right now is set to auto, and aperture, my camera is telling me that f3.5 is where we want to be. If you want to control your shutter speed, aperture, and ISO yourself, you are more than welcome to do that. In order to change the setting, we need to go into our menu, and then under the camera setting, over there, that far left tab, we're going to scroll till we see movie/HFR, which just means high frame rate. So we're going to change our mode here. It's in tab 7 of the camera section. It's on shutter priority right now, and what that is doing is you're choosing your shutter speed and then it's figuring out the other two settings. Let's go ahead and click on that, and we will just change it to M for manual exposure. Now I have full control over all three settings. I'm at f22 right now, and ISO is set to auto still, so let's change that. Remember, to change your ISO, we're going to hit right on this scroll wheel here, where it says ISO, and then scroll down to the ISO that you want. So I'm going to go to ISO 800, and then to change my aperture, because f22, remember, is a really tiny opening in the lens. It's a very small aperture. I'm going to make that much bigger because our image is way too dark. And to do that, I'm going to use this thumb wheel up here, and I'm going to go all the way to let's say f4. And now we're too bright, so I'm going to change my ISO to maybe ISO 400. Down here, we have an exposure meter. And this is telling us that we are 0.7 stops overexposed right now. If I want to get this perfect, I could go to ISO 320, and that should get us closer. Maybe ISO 250. Oh, still no. So ISO 200. And now we are at ±0, which means that we are correctly exposed according to the camera's light meter. And that's at f4, and still we're at 1/50th of a second. We are always going to use 1/50th of a second, so even if you go to manual mode, don't change that. Remember, the reason why we might want to change our aperture is if we want deeper depth of field. If we want deeper depth of field, where everything from right in front of our lens going outward into the rest of our scene is in focus or sharper, then we might go to something like f16, at which point we'd have to change our ISO to make our image brighter. So let's do ISO 3200. And now we have the same exposure overall, because we're still at ±0, but now we have deeper depth of field. So if I put this microphone here right in front of the camera, you can read the road very clearly, and in the background, you can very clearly see details in the stuff that's back there. If we were to go back to, let's go all the way to f3.5, and we'll go back to ISO 200. Exposure is still relatively almost the same. And now, if we focus in on this road, let's see if our autofocus will work. Yes, it will. Now you can see that the road is sharp. There we go. The road is sharp, but now everything in the background is blurred. Look at the ceiling tiles back there and in those bins. So that's shallow depth of field, where only a small part of our scene is in focus. And now you see the camera's autofocus has shifted to what's going on in the background, and now our foreground is blurry. So that's why you might want to control your exposure manually, so you can make those creative decisions. Remember, as your ISO increases, the amount of signal noise, the amount of image noise is going to increase too. So if we close our aperture all the way down to f/22 and we're all the way up at 8,000 ISO, then we're going to have a very noisy image. You can't really tell very much on this tiny little screen, but once we're watching it on our laptops and then on bigger screens, you will definitely see that noisiness, that kind of graininess, that ugly mess that we talked about. So we want to avoid that. All right, so I'm just going to get us back to f4, ISO 200, and then to record, remember we just press this button right here. You'll see record come onto the screen. And then when we press that button again, we'll see standby come on, and then it has recorded the clip. We can press this button down here to look at our recorded movie, and then it'll bring up this little film strip with a play button. Press the center button here, and that will play our footage back. To get back to our live view, you can sort of press halfway down on the shutter button here, and that'll get you back there. I'm going to plug in a microphone real quick to our stereo port just to demonstrate something, and I'm going to turn that microphone on. I'm going to turn our preamplifier on, and now we can see our audio levels jumping up and down. If you don't see those audio levels, if your screen looks like this, then you can just hit up once on the display button, and it's going to bring those audio levels up. And now we can see them again. So the big things that we need to pay attention to are our exposure, which we can tell from this plus or minus number down here. If it says minus, that means we're too dark, we're underexposed. If it says plus something, then we are overexposed. In general, if you are at -1, your footage is going to turn out okay. Up to +1, it'll be okay as well. We want to try to stay in that range of -1 to +1. Ideally, you know, the camera's telling us that we're at ±0. That means that we are perfectly exposed according to its light meter. We also need to watch those audio levels as we're recording audio. Now, one thing that we have not gone over yet is white balance. White balance is how your camera perceives color. So it tries to figure out what is white, and then it bases all the other colors around that. So first of all, to change our white balance, we can hit this function button, and then wheel over to where it says white balance down here. Click on that. And right now it's on auto white balance. It's doing a good job of figuring out what the color should look like. If you want to keep it on that, it will do a pretty good job, and you don't have to think about it. But if you want your color to be consistent throughout the entire film, because sometimes auto will switch between different white balances if it perceives a change, even if that change is not really there. So the best way to do this is, if you're outside, use daylight. If it's extremely overcast, use cloudy. And if you're inside at bolus, warm white is going to be your answer. You can also, if you're elsewhere and it doesn't quite look right, you can scroll through these different options and just see which one looks best to you. If you are recording inside on warm white, just remember that when you go outside, you need to change back to daylight. Okay, let's talk about different focusing options. By default, your cameras are set to continuous autofocus, and it's going to search the scene for the thing it thinks should be in focus, and it's going to continuously adjust that so that if you have somebody moving through your frame or something moving through your frame, it's going to try its best to follow that. If you want to focus manually instead, you can press this C1 button and then scroll up to manual focus, MF, click that center button, and then now this ring on your lens, the front part of it, will control your focus. You can focus in and out. With these tiny lenses on these small cameras, I think that manual focus can be very challenging. These cameras usually do a pretty good job of autofocus, and I almost always shoot on autofocus with this particular camera. So if I were you, I would keep it on autofocus continuous, AF-C. But what you could do is hit this function button here, and then this little diagram here, it says focus area. Right now it's set to focus on a wide area. It's searching this entire scene for the correct focal point. You could choose to do either just the center, or my favorite one to use is flexible spot M. So click on that, and now you have this box, and it's going to focus whatever is in that box. And you just navigate around by hitting the center button, and then using these up, down, left, and right just to find the place you want. So for instance, if I have an interview subject in this part of the frame, I'm going to click on that, and throughout the course of the interview, it's going to do a great job of just staying locked on that interview subject. And if I am filming some kind of action scene, I might switch back to wide focus, or I might try to anticipate where the action is going to happen. It doesn't do a good job of keeping up with your subject if your subject moves outside of this bounding box, because it's going to continue to try to focus inside of there. So if you have somebody who's moving through your frame, then you might want to switch back to a wide focus zone. So hit that function button again, FN, and then go to focus area and scroll up to wide. Last thing with these cameras, I'm going to go ahead and flip this off. You are only going to receive one battery in your package. So that will last you a decent amount of time, but if you have multiple interviews, if you are keeping the camera over the weekend or overnight and you're going to do multiple shoots, it's a really good idea when you're not shooting to plug it in and let it charge a little bit, because these batteries won't last forever. So using your wall charger, just plug in the USB, and then there's a port here on the side of the camera. It's this top one here. Plug that in, plug the camera into the wall, and that will charge it up. Just make sure that while you're charging it, the camera is off. As always, shoot me an email or ask me in class if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.